And the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, continues to tour areas devastated by the disaster. He's now making comments in the city of Adıyaman, where he has admitted that the earthquake response has not been as fast as it should have been. And for more on this story, we are joined by Marc Pierini. He's a senior fellow at Carnegie Europe and a former EU ambassador and head of the delegation to Syria and Turkey. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. You know, hope is fading to find more survivors, so the task is now shifting to taking care of all of these millions of people who've been displaced. What are the biggest challenges, in your view, at this moment in time?
Well, I think we have three challenges here. One, which is valid for both countries, but of course the most damages in Turkey, is the sheer magnitude of this earthquake, very violent and spread over something like 300 kilometers. So the number of people affected is in the region of 18 million in total. So this is massive, really. Secondly, in Syria, you are dealing with at least three different centers of power. You have the Assad regime, but they're not in control of the north. You have the anti-Assad militia in Idlib, and you have the Turkish forces on the northern side. So you have to juggle this, and the UN is working on this, the European Union is working on this, but it is extremely complicated for political and military reasons. In Turkey, it's a different story. Turkey is, in theory, very well equipped to deal with that, but apart from the sheer magnitude of the whole thing, the system in Turkey is extremely centralized, and therefore the response has been considered as being very slow by the people on the ground, and criticism has erupted. It's going better now. International aid has arrived from nearly 80 countries, but what we see is that in a way, the electoral campaign, which was already on its way, has taken over. So the regime has in fact, reacted in a very autocratic way. The president has said he was conscious of delays, but he was not happy with criticism. The presidential palace has introduced a special application for smartphones to denounce disinformation. They've closed Twitter and Facebook for several days, and now they're flooding the public with numbers of soldiers, number of tanks,
Right.
number of helicopters, etc. That is not going to appease the displeasure and the grief of the people. Obviously,
you're talking there about this criticism of President Erdogan. Do you think that this criticism is justified in your view?
Well, it's clear that many of the buildings which have collapsed were not respecting anti-seismic norms. That's obvious. They're obviously not being built only under Erdogan, that is not only in the last 20 years, but in the last 20 years, what you've seen is a frenzy of urbanization, of highways, airports, hospitals, and so on, seen as symbol of modernity brought about by the AKP, and a frenzy of private construction with building permits granted, with political preferences, perhaps with disregard of seismic norms. So there you have inevitably a political boomerang at play, and this is going to weigh on the election next May or whenever they happen.
You mentioned Syria, the challenges of getting aid into Syria, and the challenges there. What needs to happen, though, to get that help to the people who need it most?
Well, the first thing is that the UN, together with international donors, should get an agreement of all the parties involved. This aid is bound to come from Turkey through the Hatay province and the Gaziantep province. These are the two main axes. So an agreement with Turkey, that's probably not too difficult, but an agreement with the rebels in Idlib is very difficult to obtain, and then an agreement with the Assad regime. Obviously, Damascus is going to try to play this emergency assistance in its favor. Well, that's almost inevitable given the military and political chaos that you have there, let alone the pre-existing destruction due to 12 years of civil war. But Western countries are very reluctant at this point to work with the Assad regime, so they're trying to do the whole operation through recognized international NGOs and the UN, and inevitably this takes more time than it should.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Marc Pierini, Senior Fellow at Carnegie Europe and a former EU ambassador. Thanks so much for spending some time with us here on France
Thank you.
24.